Ethan Cole considered himself an experienced solo traveler. He'd camped in remote forests, trekked alone through desert canyons, and even spent a week on a fishing boat off the coast of Alaska. So, when a coworker mentioned an off-grid cabin for rent in the Smoky Mountains, Ethan jumped at the chance for a quiet weekend. The directions were handwritten and a little cryptic. Take the dirt road past mile marker 17. Drive until you see a rusted mailbox with 12 carved into the side. The cabin is half a mile up the hill. Keys under the rock by the porch. By late Friday afternoon, the sky had turned a dull gray, heavy with the threat of rain. The forest around the narrow road seemed unusually still, as though every bird and squirrel had vanished. When Ethan finally spotted the battered mailbox, an unease stirred in his chest. The carved numbers looked almost scratched into the metal, as if someone had done it in a hurry. He shook off the feeling and followed the steep track. Cabin 12 sat on a ridge, its roof sloping under a canopy of dark pines. It was small but sturdy, with a wide porch and a rocking chair facing the valley. No cell signal, no neighbors, exactly what he'd wanted. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and faint smoke. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a single bed was tucked into the corner. A few shelves held mismatched dishes and an oil lamp. On the table lay a thin leather notebook. Curious, Ethan flipped through it. Most pages were blank, except for a single line on the inside cover. "If you hear it, don't look out the window." He laughed nervously, probably a joke from the previous renter. That night, rain drummed against the roof. Ethan sat by the fire, reading, until a sound made him pause, soft, deliberate steps crunching the wet leaves outside. He set the book down, holding his breath. The steps circled the cabin, slow and measured, as if whoever it was wanted him to know they were there. He grabbed his flashlight and peered through the front window. Nothing but darkness. The footsteps stopped. "Probably a deer," he muttered, though the hairs on his arms bristled. He went to bed, but sleep came in uneasy fragments. At dawn, the forest looked innocent again. Mist clung to the branches, and a few birds called. Feeling silly for being spooked, Ethan hiked down to a nearby creek, fished for a while, and returned with enough trout for dinner. By evening, fog rolled in thick and low. As he cleaned his catch, he noticed something strange near the treeline. A shape darker than the fog, still and tall. He squinted, but when he blinked, it was gone. That night, the footsteps returned, heavier, closer. This time, they scraped along the wooden porch. The doorknob twitched. Ethan's heart slammed. He grabbed the fireplace poker, backing toward the bed. The scratching stopped, replaced by a slow tap on the glass of the window beside him. He forced himself not to look. Minutes dragged by. The tap became a faint whisper, almost like words just beyond hearing. He clamped his hands over his ears until silence finally returned. The next morning, Ethan decided to leave. But when he started his truck, the engine only sputtered. He popped the hood. The battery cable had been cleanly severed. He scanned the woods. Nothing moved, yet the sense of being watched pressed in on him. Back inside, he flipped through the leather notebook again, desperate for answers. Halfway through, he found more writing scrawled across several pages, frantic and messy. "It waits until night. Don't answer the door. Don't look in its face. If you see your own reflection in the window after dark, it's already inside." The last entry was a single shaky sentence. "I can hear it breathing under the floor." Ethan dropped the book, pulse racing. He checked beneath the cabin through a small hatch near the porch. Only wet dirt and stones, but the space was big enough for someone to crawl inside. As dusk fell again, Ethan fortified the cabin. He jammed a chair under the doorknob and lit every lantern he could find. Wind howled through the trees, rattling the shutters. At midnight, a deep thud shook the porch. Then came the footsteps, heavy, dragging. They circled, paused, then scraped against the walls. Something pressed against the front door, slow and testing, as if pushing its weight against the wood. Ethan gripped the poker, sweat slick on his palms. A low voice, guttural and wet, hissed his name. He nearly looked. At the last second, he shut his eyes, sinking to the floor. The voice grew louder, whispering words he couldn't understand. The oil lamp flickered violently. A coldness spread across the room, as if every bit of warmth had been drained. The whispering stopped, replaced by faint breathing from under the floorboards. Ethan bolted to the hatch. He locked it with a spare nail, backing away. Suddenly, the window behind him rattled. Against the glass pressed a shape. Not quite a face, not quite an animal, but something stretched and featureless, slick with darkness. Its outline pulsed, as though trying to squeeze through. He hurled a chair at the window. Glass shattered outward, and the thing recoiled with a sound like tearing fabric. The lamps all snuffed out at once, plunging the cabin into absolute black. Ethan ran for the door. It swung open easily, too easily, as if someone had been holding it shut from the outside and then let go. The rain had stopped. The forest was silent, thick with fog. He sprinted toward the truck, not daring to glance behind. Inside, he twisted the ignition out of instinct, forgetting the severed cable. The key turned uselessly. A shadow slid across the windshield, tall and boneless. It leaned down as if peering through the glass. Ethan threw himself out the passenger side and tore down the dirt road on foot. Branches whipped his face. The night air tasted metallic, like blood. Behind him came the unmistakable crunch of steps, always the same distance away no matter how fast he ran. After what felt like hours, faint headlights appeared ahead. A ranger's jeep. Ethan waved wildly until the vehicle skidded to a stop. The ranger jumped out. "What the hell happened to you?" Ethan glanced over his shoulder. The road behind was empty. The ranger inspected cabin 12 the next morning. The door was still smashed, glass littering the porch, but there were no footprints, no signs of forced entry. Nothing except the leather notebook on the table. When Ethan pointed it out, the ranger frowned. "That's odd. Cabin 12 burned down 20 years ago. Nobody rents it." They stood in stunned silence. Outside, the fog was lifting, revealing the charred remains of an old foundation just beyond the trees. No standing cabin at all. Ethan felt the breath leave his body. If there had been no cabin, where had he spent the last 2 nights? Lena Morales was thrilled when she landed a spot in a prestigious nursing program. To make extra money, she volunteered for night shifts at St. Agatha's Medical Center, a sprawling hospital where the newest wing gleamed with glass and chrome, while the older sections sagged under decades of dust. On her first Friday overnight, the charge nurse handed her a clipboard. "Keep an eye on Ward C. Mostly storage now, but we still monitor the alarms in there." Lena frowned. "Storage? Yeah, it used to be psych. Closed after a fire in the 90s. Hardly anyone goes down there, but the system keeps flagging motion alerts." The elevator shuddered as she descended alone. The basement smelled of damp stone and antiseptic. A faded sign read, "Ward C, restricted." Inside, the corridor stretched into darkness, its lights flickering. Peeling wallpaper revealed pale concrete underneath. Old wheelchairs and gurneys were stacked along the walls, their wheels squeaking softly as if they had shifted on their own. Lena set up at the nurse's station, the only working lamp casting a weak circle of light. She told herself it was just another boring shift. At 1:17 a.m., a noise echoed from the far end, a faint sobbing. "Hello?" she called. No answer. She followed the sound to a locked door marked C12. The crying stopped. She pressed her ear to the wood. Silence. Back at the station, she pulled up the patient records on an old computer. Most files were blank, but one name kept appearing. Rebecca Hale, admitted 1987. Discharged. The discharge date was missing. A sudden ding startled her. The security monitor flickered to life, showing the hall outside C12. In the grainy footage, Lena saw herself standing there, and behind her, a tall figure in a hospital gown, head lolling unnaturally to one side. She spun around. The hallway was empty. By 3 a.m., the temperature had dropped sharply. Her breath misted in the glow of her lamp. She heard the squeal of wheels again. One of the gurneys had moved, inching into the corridor. "Okay, that's enough," she muttered, trying to laugh it off. She texted a friend, but the message wouldn't send. No signal reached the ward. The intercom crackled. A raspy voice whispered, "Room 12, help me." Lena's stomach clenched. She checked the building map. C12 wasn't listed. She forced herself down the corridor, pushing aside old equipment. The door to C12 now hung ajar, though she was sure it had been locked. Inside, moonlight filtered through a high window, illuminating a bed with cracked leather restraints. Faded scratches scored the floor, as if someone had clawed their way across. A chart sat on the bedside table. The patient's photo was obscured by mold, but scrawled beneath was, "Do not release her. Keep the door sealed." Something shifted in the shadows near the ceiling, a pale hand gripping a pipe. Lena bolted, heart pounding, but the corridor seemed longer than before. Doors she hadn't noticed now lined the walls, each with fogged glass panes. Shapes moved inside, pressing against the glass, their mouths opening in silent screams. Back at the nurse's station, she slammed the emergency phone. Static. Then a voice, faint but clear. "You shouldn't be here." Lights snapped off, plunging everything into black. Only the monitor glowed, showing live footage of the hall. A woman in a torn patient gown was walking toward the camera, toward Lena, her head twitching with every step. The woman's eyes were pools of black. Her lips moved, forming words Lena couldn't hear. Then, slowly, she raised one hand and pointed at the lens. The screen went dead. A sharp breath sounded behind Lena. She turned and found the hallway empty again, except for a single paper file lying on the floor. On the cover, "Incident Report, Hale, Rebecca." She opened it with trembling fingers. Subject remains unresponsive to sedation. Reports seeing faces in the walls. Attempts escape nightly. Staff instructed never to open room 12. Last seen during fire evacuation. Status unknown. Ash stained the bottom edge. The shift clock finally read 6 a.m. Sunlight began to filter down the stairwell. Lena gathered her things, eager to leave. But as she headed for the elevator, she froze. The double doors to Ward C swung shut on their own, locking with a metallic click. When she reached the lobby, the day receptionist looked up. "You were in Ward C? That place has been sealed for years." "I was covering night rounds," Lena said, still shaky. The receptionist frowned. "Nobody's been assigned there since before I started. It burned in '93, after a patient disappeared." Lena turned back toward the basement stairs. A faint shape stood at the bottom landing. A woman in a charred gown, head bent at an unnatural angle. For days afterward, Lena tried to put the experience behind her. But at home, strange things started happening. Drawers opening by themselves, faint crying in the walls at night. One evening, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, except her reflection wasn't moving. It was smiling. Panicked, she dug through archives at the library. She found a yellowed newspaper clipping. "Tragedy at St. Agatha's, 1993. Fire in psychiatric ward claims 4 lives. 1 patient missing." Staff had been warned to keep a particular room locked due to unpredictable behavior. The photo beside the article showed a familiar face, blurred by time, but unmistakable. Rebecca Hale. Lena returned to St. Agatha's one last time, determined to find answers. She slipped into the basement after hours, flashlight cutting through dust. Ward C looked abandoned again. No files, no gurneys, only burned walls. At the spot where room 12 had been, she found nothing but a scorched doorframe. She felt a sudden tug at her sleeve. A voice breathed in her ear. "You set me free." The hallway behind her filled with whispering shapes, all wearing patient gowns. Their faces were twisted in anguish. At their center stood Rebecca, smiling wide, teeth too many for her mouth. Lena ran, but the exit seemed to stretch farther away. Just as icy hands brushed her neck, she burst into the stairwell and didn't stop until she reached the street. Lena quit St. Agatha's that day. She never spoke of what she'd seen, but sometimes, passing by the old hospital, she swears she sees someone standing in the basement window, watching. And at night, when she lies awake, she hears it again. The sobbing from behind a locked door, waiting for her to come back. It was supposed to be a quick weekend escape, just 4 college friends chasing adventure before graduation. Mason, Chloe, Ryan, and Tara packed an old SUV with snacks, sleeping bags, and a speaker for late-night playlists. Their destination was a remote lake in the hills, famous for its abandoned railway bridge. Locals called it Hollow Bridge, and they warned travelers to stay away after dark. Mason, always the skeptic, laughed at the stories. "It's just an urban legend," he said. "Something about a guy who drowned and drags people into the water if you stare too long." Chloe shivered. "Maybe don't joke about that while we're going there." Ryan smirked. "Scared already?" Tara, sitting in the back, said nothing. She'd read online that several people had gone missing near the bridge over the years. None were ever found. By the time they reached the lake, the sun was sinking behind the hills, bleeding red across the water. The bridge loomed ahead, a long, skeletal span of rusted steel, its pillars sinking into the foggy surface. They set up camp in a clearing nearby. After dinner, Mason suggested exploring the bridge. "Now?" Chloe asked. "Perfect time. Moon's out," Mason said, grabbing a flashlight. The walkway creaked under their steps as they ventured across. The lake below was still, reflecting the moon like a sheet of glass. A cold breeze stirred, carrying a faint odor, metallic, like wet iron. Halfway across, Ryan leaned over the railing, peering at his reflection. "Legend says if you stare into the water and whisper your name, he'll show you his face." "Don't," Chloe said sharply. Ryan grinned and called his name softly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the surface rippled. A pale face appeared just beneath, eyes wide and glassy, mouth stretched in a silent scream. Its skin looked bloated, as though it had been underwater for years. Ryan jerked back, swearing. The others leaned over, but the lake was empty. They hurried back to camp, laughing nervously, but an unease settled among them. That night, Ryan woke to a sloshing sound near the shore. He unzipped his tent and froze. Something tall and dripping stood knee-deep in the water, facing the camp. Its limbs were too long, its fingers trailing in the lake like strands of seaweed. Slowly, its head turned toward him, revealing the same bloated face from the bridge. Ryan scrambled out of the tent, shaking Mason awake. But when they looked again, the shore was empty. "Bad dream," Mason muttered, rolling over, but Ryan couldn't sleep. Morning brought clear skies, but Ryan looked exhausted. Tara offered to hike back to the main road with him if he wanted to leave early, but Mason insisted on staying. "It's just a story," he said. "We came for adventure, right?" By afternoon, dark clouds gathered. They huddled in the tent as rain lashed down. Between thunderclaps, Chloe swore she heard someone calling her name from the water. When the storm cleared, they ventured back to the bridge. The lake was calm again, eerily so. Ryan refused to look over the edge, but Mason taunted him, leaning dangerously far. "Come on," Mason teased. "Say his name." "Stop," Chloe snapped. "Something's wrong here." That evening, as dusk swallowed the hills, Tara went to fetch more firewood. She didn't return. The others searched frantically, calling her name. At the shoreline, Ryan spotted a single boot lying half-submerged. Beside it, faint footprints led into the lake and stopped, though there was no sign of a struggle. Suddenly, bubbles rose to the surface. Something pale drifted just below, then sank out of sight. They backed away, terrified. Mason suggested packing up and leaving immediately. But when they reached the SUV, every tire was slashed, the rubber torn as though by claws. Night fell heavy and wet. They huddled near the dying fire, listening. The forest was unnaturally quiet. Then came the sound of dripping water, close, though no rain fell. A shadow moved just beyond the firelight, tall, bent, its face glistening. The figure stepped forward, leaving no prints in the mud. Its voice was like water gurgling down a drain. One at a time, Ryan bolted toward the bridge. Mason and Chloe chased him, but halfway across, Ryan stopped. His eyes were vacant, fixed on the water below. Slowly, as though hypnotized, he climbed onto the railing. "Ryan, don't!" Chloe screamed. A pale hand shot up from the lake, grasping his ankle. He was yanked into the dark with a splash. Mason pulled Chloe back from the edge. The water stilled, leaving only ripples. They sprinted for the woods, branches tearing at their clothes. Somewhere behind, soft footsteps followed, steady and unhurried. Mason tripped and fell, scraping his palms. When he looked up, the figure loomed above him, dripping lake water onto his face. Its mouth opened, spilling black water onto the ground. Mason screamed and scrambled away. They didn't stop running until they burst onto an old service road. A pickup approached, an old ranger. He rolled down the window. "What are you kids doing out here?" "Something's in the lake," Chloe gasped. The ranger's face darkened. "You crossed the bridge, didn't you?" He drove them to a ranger station and gave them towels. "People vanish out there," he said quietly. "Used to be a railway worker fell through the bridge in the 40s. Body was never recovered. Folks say he waits for someone to look too long." Chloe asked, "How do we stop it?" The ranger hesitated. "You don't look. You don't say your name. And if he's followed you..." He glanced at the dark window. "Don't answer when he calls." The survivors barely slept. Before dawn, Mason woke to a faint dripping near the ceiling. He turned on his phone light. A shadow clung there, upside down, face inches from his. Water dripped from its open mouth. They fled into the gray morning, abandoning their gear. The ranger's truck was empty, keys in the ignition, radio hissing static. They drove until cell service returned and called for help. Search teams later found no trace of Tara or Ryan, or of the ranger. Years later, Mason still refuses to talk about that weekend. Chloe, however, confided in a therapist, hoping to ease her nightmares. But the dreams never stopped. Standing on a bridge over black water, a man below reaching up with long, dripping fingers. Last month, Chloe vanished from her apartment. Her phone was found on the kitchen counter, still recording a voice memo. The last seconds were only the sound of water and a man's gurgling whisper, "Now it's your turn."